So this is the dire wolf that we're going to be painting up today. It's a very quick and simple paint job to do, but it will make it look pretty good once it's on the tabletop amongst its pack.
Hi, it's Rob from the Brush and Boltgun. Today I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to paint a Soulblight Gravelords Dire Wolf. If you'd like to support the channel, our Ko-fi and Patreon pages are linked below. Now on to the video.
So the first colour we're going to use is Citadel Khorne Red, but you can use Citadel Mephiston Red for this if you want. I was just trying out a different colour to see how it looked. So either Khorne Red or Mephiston Red will work fine. Thought the Khorne Red might be a little bit different where you got the little flaps of skin hanging off the wounds. You can paint those and make them look a bit dark and gooey. But to be honest, once you've added a bit of blood for the blood god and the shades, it doesn't really make too much difference on such small areas. So whichever one you've got, you can use that. With the wounds painted red, we're now going to use a little bit of Citadel Rakarth flesh. We're just going to paint all the bones. So you've got all the ribs, you've got little bits poking out of the legs, the end of the snout. You've got plenty of wounds going on these dire wolves. So lashing the paint on those, and we can move on to the next colour. Next up, a little bit of Vallejo Black. All we're going to do here is paint the rest of the fur black around where the spray didn't quite catch it, and also around the wounds as well. There's a bit of Khorne Red gone over because I'm quite slapdash with the way I approach the colours on the base coats. So you just want to colour over those, make sure their fur is all black. Then we can carry on. Like so. Next up, we're going to use some Citadel Druchii Violet. I'm going to use this to paint all of the wounds, or the red on all of the wounds. So you want to be quite careful when you're painting it around where the bones are. It doesn't matter too much if you get some of it on. But if you can avoid that, then all the better. Just try and keep it onto the red sections, and then we can shade the bone in a moment. I'm going to use Citadel Seraphim Sepia. I'm going to use this to paint each of the little bits of bone that are poking through the skin. And the teeth there too, to give them a good coat. If you've got little bits of the Druchii Violet which is on the bone areas and it's showing through a bit, you just pop a little bit more Rakarth flesh on there and then give that a coat of Seraphim Sepia. That should be sound. So we're going to start off again with Citadel Rakarth flesh. I'm going to recolour in each of the bone segments which is poking through the skin. Next up is Citadel Ushabti bone. I'm going to use this to paint about 50% of each of the bone sections. It's going to be the top 50% where it'll be catching more light. So you want to try and give each of these sections a bit of the Ushabti bone just to brighten them up and make them stand out that little bit more. Next up is a little bit of Citadel Screaming Skull. This is going to be the final layer on the bone sections. It's just going to give them that little bit of brightness, really make them stand out. Now we're going to use Citadel Mephiston Red. I'm going to be using this to paint the inside of the wounds. So where you've got the muscle showing through, you've got some striations on those bits of muscle. So you want to be trying to pick out those and leave the shade in the recesses, so that you've got those little lines going through them. And any larger areas of kind of meat that you can see in those open wounds, you want to be getting them with the Mephiston Red too. What we're going to be doing is making the wounds that little bit brighter inside, and then the flaps of skin hanging off, we're going to be painting in a slightly different way. We're going to use a tiny little bit of Citadel Evil Sunz Scarlet, just to add some little tiny bits of colour and highlights to those striations on the open wounds. There's also some wounds that are just sort of like openings, and you can see the inside, there's no real detail. So we're using the Mephiston Red and the Evil Sunz Scarlet on those two. Now we're going to use some Citadel Khorne Red, and we're going to use this on the inside of the flaps of skin that are hanging off the wounds. You want to be leaving some of the shade in these areas, so you're just sort of like applying that in a rough and uneven way on those flaps of skin, so you get some parts that are darker than others. In the areas where you can paint the inside, maybe there's a little ridge of skin hanging off, you can get the same colour in there too. I'm going to highlight these bits using Citadel Wazdakka Red. So again, you want to be leaving the shade and some of the Khorne Red visible. And you're going to be using this just to add some highlights to some of the grooves and lumps and details within those flaps of skin. Now I'm going to use Citadel Thondia Brown base colour. I'm going to use this to apply some brown to around the head and the body of the dire wolf. So this one I'm mainly doing the back of the neck and sort of like around the sides where it joins up to the back of the neck in that kind of mane that it has. And I want to have this running down the back of the wolf too, a little bit on the underside of the neck. But basically you can paint this in the same way as any kind of wolf fur. The patterns are slightly different on each one. We can use Citadel Mournfang Brown to apply some details to the fur. So highlighting these bits where you've got the more fluffy, raggedy kind of mane on its neck. And also we're going to do some front to back lines on the smooth areas of fur, just to add a little bit of detail and highlights to them as well. Otherwise you will have these large flatter areas on its back. Now we are working on the black fur, and we're going to use Vallejo German Grey to add the first layer of highlights. So much like you did with the Mournfang Brown, you're going to be picking out any of the fur details on the wolf which are in the black areas of fur, and just give them a little highlight with the German Grey. So you can think about where the light will be catching it and which sections will be getting more highlights. I'm going to do a final highlight on the fur using Citadel Mechanicus Standard Grey. I'm going to highlight about 50% of the area that we did with the German Grey. Again, these highlights are mainly going to be on areas that are going to be catching the light, but you can pick out some of the details so they stand out a bit more on the undersides and things like that, so that you can see them a bit easier. I'm going to use Vallejo White. Use this to paint the eyes on the wolf. Pretty quick layer, this one. Obviously, depending on which dire wolf you're painting at the time, it might be slightly different to this one, because they all have their slight differences. I'm going to use a little bit of Citadel Cassandora Yellow just to shade those with a little bit of a yellow tinge. Now I'm going to use a tiny little spot of Vallejo Black just so we can put a pupil on each of those eyes. Now I'm going to use a little bit of Citadel Grax Earthshade. I'm going to use this to shade in some of the areas of fur, just to give it that kind of dirty and weathered look. Give it that hint of brown all over the sections of black fur. And also to add tiny little bits of shade in any of the creases and areas where you've got that brown fur. I'm going to use Citadel Carroburg Crimson shade, and this is going to be to apply on or around the wounds. So you want to, where you have those ribs, we're doing a little tiny bit on the top and the bottom, so as it's moving along, those kind of like strips of flesh and where it's fallen away are rubbing on the bone maybe, and that's just giving it that little hint of red at the top and bottom of those ribs. And around all these little bits where you've got bone showing through, you want to have the areas of bone where it's touching or near to the skin, just have that little hint of red around it. You can also use this to stain the fur as well, so it's got that hint of red to it all. And now we're going to add a little bit of gore to it, mainly underneath the wounds and spreading out from them. Not too much, just enough to give it that shiny, kind of disgusting look. So it looks like the fur is matted and sodden with it, but without having too much there. Now what I have done is varnished this with matte varnish before applying this, just so that the blood for the blood god stays glossy after I've varnished it. If you spray the matte varnish over the blood for the blood god, it goes nicely matte. So this is the finished dire wolf. Really pleased how it turned out. It's a very simple and quite basic way of getting them done very, very quickly, but it gives you lots of details and lots of nice little touches just to make them stand out in the pack.
Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you have, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any future content. Also, think about subscribing to some of our other social media, linked below. Thanks very much.
If you like the channel, enjoy the content and you'd like to support me, my Coffee and Patreon page are linked below. Thanks very much.